People often tell me I have a personality that's wired. I didn't quite expect to be wired physically here this morning. Thank you there, Captain Carrick. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Jerry Wachtel. I am a consultant to the Atari Games Corporation in Milpitas, California. And with me here today is Larry Graves, who's a product manager for the company, specializing in the law enforcement applications of our simulation technology. Larry's just joined the company. He's been with them, less than 2 weeks. So this is kind of a trial by fire for him, but we're really excited to be here. If I can get this thing to work. Let's see, we have a focus button, is that this? Jim Flack, who's not here with us today, is the Director of Simulation Products for the company. He's back home in California. And we call this our driving environment simulator. We're still looking for some proper names for the product and the technology. It is a prototype, and you'll hear me talk about that quite a bit more today. Before I really get started, I just want to say thank you to a couple of people. First to Mr. Leonard Mellon, who is the Executive Director of the Florida Department of Highway Safety and Motor Vehicles, who, as Captain Carrick mentioned, invited us to make a presentation in Tallahassee back in December, and I guess was sufficiently impressed with what we had to demonstrate that he has signed on for the state of Florida to participate in a number of our validation studies that will be forthcoming, and helped get the invitations out for people to be here with us today. Second to Mr. John Dovell of the Florida Department of Transportation, who was the linchpin behind getting this second demonstration here in South Florida. Third to Major Gracie, the commander of Troop E of the Florida State Patrol simulator, and to make a real difference in highway safety. And basically I went to the company and told them that they had some great potential that they weren't tapping, and the rest is not yet history, but we're working on that. Talking about history, let me tell you a little bit about the company. I'm sure you all know the name Atari. It's kind of a household word in the U.S. The company created the coin-operated video game industry in 1972 with a game called Pong. That was the first electronic coin-operated game. Since that time, they have developed more than 140 video arcade games, including games you may have heard of, especially if you have teenagers, called Breakout and Asteroids. Through the late 70s, the company was a subsidiary of Warner Communications Corporation, and there were 3 divisions, including the coin-operated division. And in 1984, 2 of those divisions were sold. The consumer electronics and the home computer divisions were sold, and so what is now the Atari Games Corporation really got its start in 1985, and what they do is coin-operated video games. So if you have an Atari 800 computer at home and it's never worked, don't talk to us. That's a different company. In magazine in August of 1989, which is how I first learned about the game. And that game has been incorporated into exhibits in a couple of museums around the country that specialize in hands-on high technology and computer applications, including the Boston Computer Museum and the Franklin Institute Science Museum in Philadelphia. The hard driving game was updated in 1990, and the name was changed to Race Driving, and it had improved vehicle dynamics and improved graphics and a number of other changes. But both the hard driving and the race driving machines were single screen forward view monitors only. There are still a number of those around in the video arcades if you don't get your fill here today. And in 1991, the company came out with a 3-screen version of those games, and it was known as Race Driving Panorama. What you see here today is a derivative of that panorama game, and as we'll talk about some more in a little while, it still has a lot of the characteristics of a video game in it. The simulator part of this game is still very much in the early prototype phases, and that's one reason we're here today. We're looking for the opinions and the feedback of the experts in the field to help tell us what we need to do to improve this further and to make it applicable to highway safety applications. We're looking very much for your input on that. The first time we ever demonstrated this system, as you see it here, was at the annual meeting of the Transportation Research Board, which is part of the National Academy of Sciences, and that was in January of 1991. So we're exactly 1 year into the development of this product and the going around and soliciting feedback on it. This question comes up quite a bit. What is a maker of what are basically toys and games for teenagers doing, thinking that they can produce a serious product for research, for training, for testing? And I try to answer that question with these three words: realism, ruggedness, and affordability. The teenage male audience, which are the primary customers of the Atari games arcade products, demand realism. These kids are very much into driving, whether it be racing or otherwise, and they will simply not throw their quarters into a machine if it doesn't give them the experiences that they're looking for. And so if this product had less realism to these folks, it would not have been as popular and stayed as popular as it is. Second thing is ruggedness, as Captain Carrick can attest to. This thing came in 3 wooden crates that were banged around mercilessly. We spent an hour and a half or so yesterday afternoon unbolting the crates, manhandled it out onto the floor. It weighs about have that difficulty. And the third is affordability. In order to put this out in arcades and have it make money 25 cents at a time, it can't cost very much to begin with. And so not only is it a reasonably inexpensive product, but because a lot of the... I've mentioned that this is a prototype, and the question is, how are we going to get from here to a simulator that is available to everybody who wants it? And we're trying to go about of understanding those user needs, go back with our engineering staff and modify the hardware and the software, and that work is going. It improves our ability to separate out drivers who are sober from drivers who are not, drivers who are fatigued from drivers who are not, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. Be one of keeping the company honest throughout this development program. I consider my independence from them to be very important in being able to subject this to proper scrutiny and to the constant improvement that it takes. We've talked about the demonstrations and meetings such as this. We intend to go about this process in a very public way, and as I've said, we intend to get as much feedback from the experts as we possibly can. In terms of modifying hardware and software, I won't go into too much technical detail. We can talk about some more later. We can essentially model any vehicle type as long as we have the known characteristics of that vehicle. And as you will experience, if you're driving a Chevrolet Corvette, everything about that experience is appropriate to the Chevrolet Corvette. Make this the most realistic simulation possible. All of those things are undergoing modification and will be for some time. The validation program is an acronym for a technical advisory committee or a technical advisory council, where we will bring together the experts in a particular field, law enforcement, and we'll form technical advisory councils. Those people and the organizations they represent will get simulators on loan to them, so we will get the feedback as these simulators go through the validation process. We will develop experimental designs to put the simulators in a research environment today. And as you will see, the displays, the software in this simulator are set up for a law enforcement training vehicle. That's why it's black and white, although I understand in Florida it should have been black and yellow. It's got red and blue flashing lights on the top, although I understand that in Florida they should be all blue. The elderly driver assessment process and a number of others that we'll talk about. The third is the growing segment of the research community interested in medical research and the diagnosis of medical ailments. We'll talk about that as well. Let me just spend a little bit of time on each of these. In law enforcement training, we have had a number of very strong expressions of interest from training academies, not only here in the U.S., but in Europe as well. There is a system police vehicle or other law enforcement vehicles, not only in high-speed pursuit, but also in everyday driving where the majority of the accidents occur. We also see this as having great applicability for the training of the judgment skills that are necessary for this kind of application. We see this primarily as a bridge between 4 or 6 or 8 systems like this could be installed in a room with an instructor stationed at the head of the room, and the capability exists for each of these officers or trainees to drive the simulator either in an independent training mode or in which they can all be linked together. And so if we are looking at, for the motor vehicle application, I've broken this down into near-term and long-term applications, and I'll talk a little bit about potential benefits and the current status of our work there. Some involved for the occasional accident that results. And so one application would be to pre-screen drivers to determine as a result of the simulation whether they are ready to take their driver's for the partial fulfillment of a licensing exam. There are driving requirements that very few, if any, states are able to subject their license candidates to. For example, merging on high-speed freeways and driving at night and in snowy or rainy conditions. There are certain high-risk situations that every driver faces when he gets out on the road, but for many reasons, some of that into the licensing exam. We see this as a potential diagnostic and remediation aid. A driver who fails a licensing exam, who has points taken off because he poorly executed a left turn or failed to follow road signs for speed, holds true for a self-assessment tool. It is possible that if these simulators we see it as a potential aid to determine driver license restrictions. Right now, unless the medical system kicks out an applicant or they get involved in a licensing exam more than once in their lives, and if their skills begin to deteriorate, whether their skills of vision or reaction time under the influence of drugs, my personal feeling is it may not matter why a driver is impaired. He may be impaired because he had a fight with his spouse that day, or he may be impaired because he stayed awake all night to get something done and is simply fatigued. The goal is serve to help to do that. I've kind of alluded to some of these benefits for the DMV application, but we see the potential for great reductions in those folks who go out and conduct the exams on the road with drivers who perhaps shouldn't be out on the road. We see this as leading to the potential for increased RAM with their participation. And Mr. Mellon has agreed to do the same with the state of Florida. So in the next 4 to 6 months or so, we will have one or more of these simulators in place. Somewhere, California and Florida will be the linchpins. We have also gotten expressions of interest from the states of Oregon and Washington, and they will probably make up our first DMV TAC. I mentioned medical research and diagnosis. There are some folks here in the room who are experts in that field. Practitioners in this field, physicians and physical therapists, are increasingly being faced with difficult licensing decisions. People who are post-stroke victims or suffering from Alzheimer's or sleep apnea, physically handicapped or challenged people. As our society ages, the elderly and the infirm are becoming an increasing proportion of the driving public. And there's a lot of research data to indicate that there are, as folks age, their driving ability begins to deteriorate in many key areas. Occasionally they have their licenses suspended because of medical conditions. There is a grant that has been received by the Michigan Law Enforcement Academy to use an Atari simulator to study seatbelt use among law enforcement officers, to respond to a request for proposals from the U.S. government on crash avoidance research using the simulator. We see other possible training applications, including driver's education, both in a public forum and in private, coming out of the University of Alberta Medical Center in Canada, who want to develop what I'm calling an injury awareness motivational program for teenage drivers, where they are going to try to promote the message. As I mentioned earlier, it has what we consider a very sophisticated vehicle dynamics model. It has force feedback controls. This is one of the things that sets this machine apart from many other simulators. As you'll see when you drive it, very different characteristics of acceleration, braking, steering, etc. I would encourage you all to drive off the road as well as on the road. Establish wind gusts. These are presently set at the factory, but this is just one of the many characteristics that can be modeled in the simulator. And you'll experience this with very realistic feel in the steering, realistic feedback. If you get airborne on the steering wheel, if you go off the road onto the grass or the gravel, you'll feel the wheel shaking in your hands, trying to tug it out of your control. Other operational displays and controls include the brakes, the gear shift, the ignition switch, and the drive here today. And I would encourage you to experience them all. There are a number of others that are under development now. Each of these routes is approximately 10 or 20 miles long, but because this simulator is not filmed, you can drive on or off the road, you can drive around the buildings if you want to. I would encourage you, when you see the cows, if you want to do that. So we do have, in the environment, in one of these courses, there are other vehicles, there are the cows, there are road signs and markings and buildings and trees and other elements. Now, you might think pedestrian, you might think bicyclist. These are things that can be created of these simulators. You will also see road signs here that mark curves for 90 miles per hour. Please, the next generation that has all of that modeled in it. I've got a videotape that I can show you that will depict what that begins to look like. As I mentioned, the roadway environment can include and does include horizontal and vertical curvature, paved or unpaved roads, city and rural and suburban streets, and roadway sound through your tires if you're on the road or off the road. If you crash, and I'm sure you all will crash, you will experience both visual and auditory effects of that. For our law enforcement demonstrations here, we can simulate siren and lights and also presentation. In other words, when you sit in the seat, you are in the driver's seat and you are driving looking out through your windshield. You're not driving a car that's out there in front of you. Also on this videotape, we have a demonstration of a machine in the laboratory that has 5 screens, whereas this has 3, and that one has a 225-degree field of view. So you can see very dramatically that you can approach a stop sign and look right and look left and see the side road that you're at and see whatever traffic may be. What that backup module might look like in conjunction with the device you see here. It's quite feasible. Obviously, it will add to size, weight, expense, complexity, but there's no technical limitation to it. Data collection and data analysis is important for the validation study and important if you're doing research. As I say, the data link permits data collection at about 30 frames per second. And any major parameter that is of importance to people studying this is available. Vehicle position on the road and in the lane, your heading angle, your yaw angle, your lane position and lateral placement, time on the road or off the road, if you're over the center line, all of these things can be measured. Driver reaction time to any event can be measured. If a traffic light turns red, we can measure the response time before the driver notices that traffic light or takes action. steering wheel position, brake pedal pressure, all these kinds of things that are of interest to researchers are possible. Other things that are of interest to researchers are what we call secondary or subsidiary tasks. I mentioned the radio or the cellular telephone. We can instruct drivers to drive on a route at keep the speed limit and then give them a telephone call on the cellular phone and see what that does to their driving performance, something that's quite a realistic problem these days. So we can study driver attentional demand. The next generation will include, we hope, an automated data collection and analysis capability using SPSS, which is a standard statistical software package that's widely used. And the instructor station that is under development now will permit the instructor or the trainer to employ fairly sophisticated techniques of control and of measurement. I just want to leave you with one thought. I got a birthday card not long ago, and that's what it did. So after I laughed at this birthday card, I realized that there's a true message lurking beneath this. Driving is dangerous, and it's not just that the elderly are dangerous. There are more cars on the road. There are more devices in the vehicles that are demanding the driver's attention, that compete with his need to drive his vehicle. For many, many reasons, traffic safety and measurement of driver performance are increasingly of concern to all of us. And I like to think that this simulation technology is developing so quickly, and that the sophistication is going up and the price is coming down so quickly that we are able to do some things in improving highway safety that we've never been able to do before. So what I'd like to do is show you this video very briefly. The first presentation here is something that was filmed at the recent conference of the International Association of Chiefs of Police. And it shows Jim Flack, the corporation's director of simulation products, driving the simulator. That's followed by some of the shots that we took in the laboratory a few weeks ago, showing you the 5-screen machine and some of the night and the fog and the snow scenes that are under development. And when that's done, we're going to throw the switch and hope that it's as rugged as I've been promising you, and that it turns right on and operates, and you can all drive it to your heart's content. Larry and I will be here all day to answer questions and talk with you one-on-one. And certainly, if you want to go off to lunch and come back, we'll be here, and the simulator will be here all day. And we certainly encourage you to drive it as long and as hard as you possibly can. And we very much want to hear your thoughts, good and bad both, because it's only through your feedback that we can improve this product still further. So thank you very much for your time, and I will turn on this video. Great.
See some of the more popular items at the IACP conference this year. And James Flack is director of simulation product for Atari Games Corporation, and this has certainly been popular. Tell us about this.
Well, this machine's a new product in development now. We don't expect to finish the development until spring of next year. It should be for sale in the summer time frame. It's a driving engines are creating a perspective view out my windscreen of the scene as it goes by. All the objects in the scene are three-dimensional. You can drive anywhere. I can drive around the back of Sam's Cafe here, and Sam's has a backside. This sample training scenario that I have here is a sample of a
but this is great. I can see how this is a wonderful way to train, a three-dimensional way of
lines. A lot of people would feel rather disturbed if they were driving a simulator and seeing these scan lines. That's visible to the video camera. Because of that, video cameras tend to pick up the scan lines. This is 5-screen. You'll notice there's no traffic in this scenario. The engineers are decomposing what's in the simulator so that they can go back to the basics and then rebuild it back up again. So nothing else has changed in what you see here except that there's a 5-screen unit instead of a 3, and the angle of coverage of each of the screens has been changed a little bit. So what you're getting here is 225-degree field of view instead of the 160 that you get there. And in addition, the driver's eye is moved back away from the screens just a little bit, so it's less of an intense visual image. Let me fast forward. This will demonstrate not only that you can pull into driveways, but if you want to make a U-turn and go back the other way, you can do that. That's one of the beauties of graphics. You'll notice that the signs at the moment are not modeled on the back side, so that's one way to know. If you find yourself not knowing which direction you're headed in the simulator today, the trick right now is that the signs have their legends on them only in one direction. Here's some of the first experiments with night scenes in the simulator. We're pulling up to a T intersection, and you'll see that the driver can look fully to the left and fully to the right down the side road. So if there was traffic coming at him, he'd be able to see that from this position. So again, these are the earliest experiments, and the colors are not right yet, but we wanted to demonstrate to ourselves that the technology was accessible to us. And I think you'll see that it's a pretty good beginning. I'm just showing this video, and then we're going to turn the machine on. There you go, sit down. Let me move through this a little bit. Yeah, there's fog and there's a snow scene. So okay, this will show you